Welcome back. This time we're talking about the series premiere of Frequency, CW's remake of the 2000 film of the same name starring Jim Caviezel and Dennis Quaid. Now be warned, this video is going to contain plenty of spoilers for this pilot episode of Frequency, and although I'm going to try to keep it at a minimum, there will be some spoilers for the 2000 film as well. I have to say, I'm a big fan of the original film and really considered an underrated and kind of unknown gem. Those who have seen it that I've talked to, pretty much every one of them loves it. And if I were to ever make a list of the top movies to watch on Father's Day, Frequency would be right there at the top of the list with films like Field of Dreams. So I have to say, I was kind of surprised at myself for not being really upset by the fact that they were remaking this into a television series. I have to think that's because I really didn't know this project existed until a couple of weeks ago when I was looking at all the various new series debuting this fall to figure out which ones I wanted to watch and which ones I wanted to do videos on. And upon learning that this series even existed, I quickly went onto YouTube, watched the trailer, and really felt that they had done the movie justice, at least from what they were showing in the trailer. So if you made it through the spoiler warning, I'm going to assume that you've seen the pilot episode. But if you haven't seen the movie, there are some significant differences that I'd like to discuss. You have a cop whose father died 20 years before when they were a young child. And then in present day, a old ham radio begins working for whatever strange reason and allows them to communicate with their father back in the past. In the movie version, Frank was played by Dennis Quaid, and he was a fireman who was killed in a 5-alarm fire. And Jim Caviezel was his son John. The TV series changes John to Raimi, a young woman played by Peyton List, who's previously appeared in shows such as Blood and Oil and Tomorrow People. On a completely unrelated side note, I did not know until this show debuted that there's actually two Peyton Lists out there with their names spelled completely identically. The other Peyton List being the Disney Channel star who's been in shows like Jessie and Bunked. But as far as the show goes, in this version, Frank, played by Riley Smith, who had a run on Nashville, is a cop instead of a fireman. And at the time of his death, he'd been undercover for 2 years, ruining his marriage and putting a bit of a strain on his relationship with his daughter. And when he dies, the story is that he was a dirty cop, which puts a completely different spin on his relationship with his daughter than the movie Frank had with his son, who grew up idolizing him. In this version, Raimi hates her father, so much so that despite dating her boyfriend Daniel for 2 years, she's really never spoken about her father to him. Although by the end of this first episode, it appears that bridge has been rebuilt as far as her believing that he wasn't a dirty cop. For the most part, the pilot episode plays out a lot like the movie did. Raimi is able to give her father just enough clues so that he's able to survive the events that led to his death originally. And his survival has major impacts on Raimi's life as well as others. And the biggest surprise among these changes, if you haven't seen the movie, is the fact that her mother, Julie, played by Devin Kelley, no longer is living and, in fact, went missing shortly after her father didn't die. And, in fact, a set of remains that had been found earlier in the episode that she was investigating turns out to not be a friend of her mother's, but actually her mother herself, making her a victim of a serial killer known as the Nightingale Killer. And the other big change involving this Nightingale Killer is the fact that instead of being kind of a one-hit wonder, killing about 3 women 20 years before and then mysteriously stopping, he's now stayed active, and many, many more women have died than in the original timeline. This, of course, is very similar to how the movie plays out, because pretty much the latter half of that movie involves father and son doing a joint investigation into this Nightingale Killer to not only save John's mother, but also to ensure that these other women that didn't die originally remain alive. And the other big change involving Raimi's life is the fact that she never met her boyfriend Daniel. We actually find out that Raimi's mother is the one that introduced the two of them, and since she went missing when Raimi was a child, she obviously couldn't do any introducing. So when she goes to meet her boyfriend near the end of the episode, instead of being prepared to propose to her, he doesn't know who she is at all. As the events play out in the episode, this is sort of the preamble gut punch leading up to Raimi discovering that her mother was a victim of the Nightingale Killer. Now there's one other thing that the show does a little differently than the movie, and I think it's going to have an important impact on how the show moves forward. Now both in the show and the movie, Frank is still not alive in present day after being saved by his son or daughter, depending on which version you're watching. In the movie, he died of lung cancer several years before present day. In the show, he died in a car crash. Now, in the movie, this allowed John a chance to try to save his father by convincing him to quit smoking. In the show, it's going to be more difficult for Raimi at this point in time to give Frank enough information about a car crash that's going to happen 15 years in the future as far as he's concerned. To me, this is an obvious attempt by the show to keep Frank from being alive in present day, allowing it to tell its story in a more long-form fashion than the movie was trying to do. Of course, the conceit is that Raimi really could tell her father the exact date, time, and location of the car crash that killed him so he could be prepared, even though it would be 15 years in the future. I would imagine they're going to have the conversation about Frank still not being alive in present day. It could come as early as the second episode, depending on how they play out the story. Now I want to try to wrap this up. First of all, I really enjoyed this pilot episode. I thought they did a great job of capturing the emotion of the movie and the dynamics of the father-child relationship. And I really felt that Peyton List and Riley Smith did excellent jobs in their performances as daughter and father. Now, if the show follows the same basic format as the movie, they're basically going to be co-leads, with Raimi leading the action in present day while Frank is leading the action 20 years before. So the fact that they gave such great performances in this pilot episode really gives me a lot of hope that they're going to be able to pull this show off. My concern, obviously, is how long they can keep this story feeling fresh while providing new challenges for Raimi and Frank. They did seem to set up a number of original storylines that were not in the movie. Of course, we're going to have the Nightingale storyline, and I'll be curious to see if that plays out in a similar fashion to the movie. I'm not going to spoil anything for the last act of that movie if you haven't seen it. It's definitely worth watching. But the show has also added this element of the crooked cops and this organized crime syndicate that Frank was investigating, and now Raimi's asking questions that could get her in trouble in the present as well. So we'll just have to see if there's actually enough meat on those two bones to carry us through at least this first season, and maybe they can start introducing new stuff later on. We do know that the past is very fluid, and as they continue making changes to the past as Raimi now knows it, especially trying to save Julie, the fact that Frank is still alive is not a guarantee. And of course, in present day, Raimi doesn't have the benefit of someone telling her what happened, so she can avoid pitfalls like talking to the wrong person about police corruption or about the Nightingale killer, since he is still active in this new timeline. So despite the fact that I really don't know how I'm going to manage to watch this much television, let alone do videos on them, Frequency is another show that has really drawn me in and is definitely one that I want to continue following and hopefully do videos on. It's interesting that we got this and Timeless in the same season because there are some very similar aspects to how both of these pilot episodes ended. And although both do involve time travel, I think they're going to be telling very different stories, and how they deal with these similar aspects as far as what we saw in each pilot episode, I'll be interested to see how they handle them in a different fashion. So if you've seen this pilot episode, what did you think about it? Is this a show that you're going to continue watching? As always, you can subscribe to my channel, check out some of my TV and movie reviews, and until next time, keep the radio broadcasting.